Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and to today's tutorial where I'm going to be showing you the steps and techniques and everything that I use to create the lemur that you're seeing here. I've previously done a video about how to create the background. If you want to watch that, I'm going to leave it in the description below for you guys. I used Pan Pastels for that, and for the actual lemur I'm going to be using polychromos coloured pencils and some Pan Pastels as well. So let's get into this guy. The first thing that I've done is created the eyes here, and I've just used some dark sepia, really gently outlined the outline of the eye and the pupil, and then using a little bit of a heavier pressure I've just gone in and really kind of firmed that in to really get the shape in there. You can see I'm kind of adding in the eyelids and everything, making sure the pupil is really nice and dark. Before going in and adding in the iris colour. So I've started with my lightest colours, as I always do when creating eyes or when using coloured pencils in general. So I've just used some Naples yellow and then going up to my darker colours, so using some burnt ochre, some sanguine, some burnt umber and burnt sienna as well, making sure to keep the kind of very middle of the iris the lightest part, and then the edges and around the pupil are where the darker shadows are. So that's where I'm adding those kind of burnt umber, burnt sienna kind of tones. You can also see that I've left the highlight of the eye free of any colour. I've used the negative space method here, gone around it, and I've just left the paper white there for the time being. Into the eye I've also added in some green into the shadows, because layering orange and green together creates like a really kind of nice neutral tone, and it creates grey rather than using grey, so that's a little tip for you there if you want to create some shadows. For the highlight itself I've just used some sky blue. I've also used some Payne's grey in there as well, just to create like a little bit of like sky reflecting in there, so adding in blue to white areas kind of makes them appear a little bit whiter as well. I've added in some little eyelashes that you can see reflected, and just really paid attention to the reflections in the eye. Paying attention to those really small details like that is going to help to make it look a lot more realistic rather than just kind of half-assing it. Then we turn our attention to the fur around the outside of the eyes and onto the face and everything. So for this I've just put down some light grey, so use some cold grey one, a warm grey one, and then just gradually getting darker into those grey tones as well. So I've mainly used Payne's grey for this and some warm grey 4 to create the real darker shadows, and then going in with a little bit of dark sepia as well to really darken it up. And I'm really making sure that I follow the fur direction going around the eye. That's always important. You want to make sure that above the eye the fur is kind of coming up and to the left in this case, and on the bottom you want to make sure that the fur is kind of angled coming down and towards the left. If you were doing the other eye as well, so if the lemur was face on or something, then you would do the second eye on the right, you'd do the opposite direction, so the fur coming up and to the right. So you want to make sure that the fur kind of eclipses around the eye in those ways, and that's going to help to create the form of the eye socket there, which is really, really important. It's going to help to create depth within your portrait and everything, so you want to make sure that you pay real close attention to your fur direction. You can see as well that as I've got darker with the fur around the outside, it's really made the eyes kind of glow, which is really nice for this particular subject, because if you are familiar with lemurs you can often see like these really bright kind of startling eyes, so that was really helpful in creating that kind of look for this guy here. For the lighter patches of fur I've just added down some warm grey 1 or cold grey 1, depending on whether the fur was kind of warm or cool tones, so whether the fur contained more blue or whether it contained more kind of like browny tones. I've also added in a layer of sky blue. Again, when you're adding in blue on top of like really white looking areas, it helps it look even whiter regardless of whether it's a warm or a cool toned area. So even though this was kind of like a warmer toned area, I've added in that blue and it just helps it to appear a lot brighter. And then I've just used some really short fur strokes coming from the area of the eye socket and using like a tapered line. I've got a tutorial on how to create this type of line, so I'll leave that in the description as well for you guys. And just making sure that I lift the pressure off the pencil towards the ends of the strokes to create this really kind of nice soft flicked texture. You can see the effect that it's got here as I've added in a little bit more. You can see all of those tapered strokes and how kind of soft and everything it makes it look, and it just kind of dissipates that dark colour of fur into that lighter colour of fur as well. And I'm just continuing that same technique with the darker colours on top of those lighter colours to give that fur texture. And if you're wondering like why you don't go in straight away with like a dark pencil, just going straight in with a Payne's grey or something, if you went in with just one colour, the fur and everything would look kind of flat and it wouldn't have very much dimension. Obviously when you're looking at fur with your own eyes, you can see like different tones within it, and you can like look as if you can sink your fingers into it. If you went in with just one colour, you wouldn't get that effect when you are drawing. So that's why we like to layer up with lighter tones underneath and gradually getting darker. And also you can use those lighter tones to shine through to help as like highlights or accents within the fur and that kind of thing. So it's really important to make sure that you do layer your colours in this way to create that depth in the fur and to create that really kind of finger sinking feeling. I'm just repeating the whole process of all of that through the face. Around the eyes the fur was slightly longer, so I made much more kind of longer fur strokes with the pencils. But as I come down towards the nose and the, I don't know if you call it a muzzle on a lemur, I'm not sure, but I'm just going to go with nose. The fur gets a lot shorter, so I've just made sure that my fur strokes are really short lines, dots in some places where the fur is really close to the skin. And you can kind of see the difference in the two textures there on the kind of lighter section of the nose compared to the darker areas around the eyes. As for the nose itself, this is where I got out some Pan Pastels. I decided to use Pan Pastels as a base purely because I could get some really nice dark tones really quickly and then layer pencils on top, and you can also layer lighter colours on top of Pan Pastels, so it makes it easier to add in highlights and that kind of thing. So I'm just using some of the, I don't know what shade it was in the Pan Pastels, but it was something like Chrome Oxide Green Extra Dark or something like that, and just using my little soft tool to pat that down and add in a few different grey tones as well, coming down the nose or the mouth area of the lemur as well. Yeah, you can see I'm just kind of adding that in, using that patting texture like I did on the background. If you want to learn how to do the background, that link is in the description for you, but I'm using the same technique as I did on the background for adding the Pan Pastel to the actual lemur here. The key here is to make sure that it kind of blends out into the existing coloured pencil that I've already added, and as I said, that you can add lighter coloured pencils over the top of Pan Pastel, so it is actually quite easy to blend the areas together. Whilst I had the Pan Pastels out as well, I thought that I would add in some further darker areas. So in the inner ear section, that was really dark. Coming around the head, there's a little bit more of like a darker tone where you've got like the salt and pepper flecked fur on the top of the head there. So just added all of those areas in whilst I had the Pan Pastels out as well. And then to help to kind of make sure that the area between the background and the nose and everything was looking good, I just went in with my coloured pencils and just made sure that those lines were kind of really nicely joined. You can see just refining the edge that I've created with the Pan Pastel there as well. You can see how nicely the coloured pencils layer over the top of the Pan Pastels, and obviously because the Pan Pastels are like dusty and everything, they can get right into the crevices of the tooth of the paper, which is fantastic. So it looks like all of the tone is like filled, rather than having like when you look in close you can kind of see the paper texture on some of my pieces, but with this, with the Pan Pastel area, you cannot see the tone of the tooth of the paper, which I think adds to the realism element of this a lot more than other pieces that I've previously created. I've also added in blue to structure some highlights through the kind of, it's not wrinkled, but there are a few like kind of little raised bits on the skin, on the muzzle of the lemur here. So I've just used some blue, and I'm using my trusty Holbein soft white pencil as well to add in whiskers, and as you can see it's adding them really nicely over the top of the Pan Pastel here. I'm just using an incredibly light hand and just really gently adding those in, and then also using my black pencil to add in some of the whiskers which are overlapping the green background here as well. You can see really nicely and easily added in, nice and soft tapered lines as well to add in all of those whiskers. So I think this gives a really nice effect and kind of completes the edge of the lemur around here as well. So I'm just skipping straight to around the ears. I've added in our base layers, and I'm just kind of adding in some, I think it was Cold Grey 5 I used for this, just to add in some really soft fur lines The fur again is longer around the ears, so I've elongated those fur lines a lot more than I did around the nose and on the forehead. The forehead I just created, you saw the base of the Pan Pastel there, and I've just literally used a couple of darker fur strokes, so some black and some dark sepia through there to create that kind of flecked appearance, and then also used my Holbein Soft White pencil as well to create some of those whiter fur lines through there. So I'm just adding in some of the darker areas around the ear, adding in those fur strokes, kind of breaking up that really dark Pan Pastel area in the middle there that I added in, giving my Holbein Soft White a little bit of a sharpen as well, so I can add in those fine white lines which are coming over and into that dark area within the inner ear. You can see adding in those little bits of fur lines there have kind of created the depth that I wanted to convey. So you got this like really dark tunnel within the ear, and then all of these like really light fur lines overlapping that are really catching the light. I'm using the Pan Pastels once again to add in some of the darker areas in the fur around the neck, just making little tiny lines with the like initial patting of some of the darker Pan Pastel, and then as the kind of Pan Pastel fades off the tool, I'm just using that to fill in the rest of the gaps that maybe aren't as dark as those initial ones that I've added in. And again, just using a light coloured pencil, so a warm grey one, to add in the lighter areas on the neck, on the back behind the ears, and then using some sky blue as well to help that create like that nice white tone. I'm using the Holbein Soft White to bring those white fur lines off around the edge into that green area as well to create that kind of really fuzzy look. So I want to make him look really fuzzy. If you were just to leave the edge like really kind of crisp, you wouldn't get that really nice fluffy feeling. So you want to make sure that if you do have a background or anything that's really fluffy, you want to make sure you bring some of those lines off the edge of your drawing so that you get that kind of fluffy texture. It also adds again to that depth, so it looks like the fluff is extending off of the head, which it will naturally, and it just helps to create that depth, and it's like, oh yeah, I can tell that this thing is really nice and fluffy. These darker areas here, all I'm doing basically is I put down a layer of the lighter tone, and then I've just worked over the top of the Pan Pastel areas with some darker colours and used that tapered line, that flicking method, to come into those lighter areas, and I've worked both in the direction of the fur and also in the opposite direction of the fur to help to create that overlap of those areas. This is a really tricky thing to kind of get your head around, and I do have another video of that as well. I'm actually going to leave my fur series in the description below, so you can check out all of the different ways to do different types of fur, which will be really helpful for you guys if you want to do more kind of mammal subjects. But yeah, I'm also really making sure that I pay attention to the fur direction, because there are several different fur directions here, and making sure that you get those going in the right place, in the right direction, will just help to create this really dense look. So he looks really dense because he's got like these dark ridges where you can see that the fur is parting, where other little sections of fur are kind of coming in and intersecting, and that's what creates like these really dark pockets of fur, like where you've got these different areas adjoining. So that's what's going to help to create the depth in the fur, just adding in those really dark pockets and making sure that they're nicely blended, and that you've got this really nice overlap between those areas as well. So doing this once again with some of the other areas coming towards the back of the lemur now, just adding in a little bit of a lighter tone of the Pan Pastel, and then doing exactly the same thing, just bringing in some fur lines and everything over the top, using the lighter pencils to create that overlap. I'm also using the Pan Pastels here to try and create some of those little tapered lines already, to get that kind of element already in there. You can kind of see that on this particular section of the lemur there. But I'm just going to go over with some darker pencils to help really define that and exaggerate that kind of fur texture through there. And you can see just how much depth there is between like that little lower section that I've completed compared to the areas where I haven't completed anything. You can just see that just by adding in some very, very small fur strokes, you can already kind of convey that area of depth through there. On the back here, there was large sections of creating this salt and pepper type fur, so it's flecked with dark and light as well. And to create that, I've created the light background, and then I've just gone in with the darkest pencil and literally just made like tiny little dashes making sure they don't touch each other, so leaving a little bit of a gap between each of these little lines and just adding individual lines in the direction that the fur is going to help to create this look. And that will help to give you got like the black lines, and then leaving spaces in between will help to create that kind of flecked white appearance through there. I've also used some other pencils to help tone the edges, so using them on the side and kind of glazing them over to give them some shadow, maybe alter the tone of one or two as well a little bit more. But I haven't gone in with several layers on this area, and that's because I think if I went in with several different colours, so if I went from a really light and then went through mid-tones and then went through dark, I think it would really lose a lot of that white tone, and I wanted to preserve as much of that white tone as possible to help to convey the full effect of like this flecked look. So I just went in with the base tone, so some warm grey one, then I just went straight in with some Payne's grey. I think I also did go over in one or two places towards the end with some dark sepia as well, but I literally just used those two pencils to create that particular type of texture on that fur, and I think it came out with a really nice effect. I'm really happy with how that actually looks. Again, with the lower bits down here, I've used some Pan Pastels to add in the darkest areas, and use that negative space method to go around the lightest areas, and then filled in the lightest areas with some warm or cold grey one, and then just use my Holbein soft white pencil to add in some fine lines, kind of little flyaway hairs over the top to give that depth of that fur. And just finishing off the lemur back here, just using that same technique of creating those individual lines. This did take quite a while actually, just adding in tiny little flecks of this colour, leaving gaps in between, and then shading a little bit to help to blend all of the other areas in. But you can just see the effect of it, and I do think that it is a really great effect. But that is pretty much all that I've got to share with you guys with regards to the technique. If you do want to follow along with the full thing, it is available on my website and over on Patreon as well. It's available to the £13 tier over on Patreon, and my website is the same price as well. But yeah, the full tutorial over there, I think it's about 4.5 hours long, as well as the whole catalogue of everything that I've ever drawn for tutorials. If you want to check that out, head on over to either of those. The links are in the top of the description below. But yeah, let me know in the comments what else you would like me to draw this year. I want to kind of make some tutorials that you guys really want to see. I'm going to be drawing a lot of birds this year. I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, I will be dropping a video next week regarding my Polychromos giveaway. So you haven't missed that. I've just been waylaid with everything else, trying to get everything else done. That is coming. Watch out for that video next week, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.